When I'm not busy delivering pizzas and making crappy YouTube vids, I work on a few core projects, one of which is an RPG I call Project TQ. As far as making games is concerned, it's fairly well known that RPGs are right at the top of difficulty. If the difficulty of an average game project is a 6-pack of beer, then an RPG is at least a keg. And a multiplayer RPG, or MMO, is the whole fucking brewery. So I decided a few years back that making an RPG like Final Fantasy VII with the graphics of Octopath Traveler was somehow a great idea. But it seemed a bit easy, so I decided to make it multiplayer as well. Thus was born Project TQ, a multiplayer active time battle 2.5D RPG that I'm working on entirely solo. And I don't mean solo with a bunch of my mates. I mean it's just me doing the whole thing, everything from building the multiplayer framework from scratch to the story, animations, character art, which is why I don't post up vids every week. Basically, I wanted to see if the solo experience of something like Final Fantasy VII would translate to a multiplayer environment, and I love the old school boomer pixel art, so delivering it in that aesthetic made sense. Now, Square Enix is tighter than a fish's cram hole when it comes to development budgets, but Final Fantasy VII had a rough budget of about $45 million in 1997, which is about $100 million in today's money. I'm guessing Octopath Traveler had a budget of at least $20 million, and a good deal of that would have just been spent on the art and animation pipeline since 2.5D games are front-loaded with a shit ton of assets. So making a hybrid of the two with a budget of less than about $50 million is the definition of insane. I have a budget of about $0. Given that you can't buy much with $0, I have to cut corners somewhere. So I use AI to generate concept art that I redraw and animate by hand just to get the general idea across. But it's all placeholder until I can afford to pay rent and some proper artists, preferably in that order. As far as Project TQ is concerned, I'm working on a new type of multiplayer combat based on the old school active time battle system in games like Final Fantasy VII that I call multiplayer ATB. Multiplayer ATB uses a sort of network queue to synchronize character turn order in battles, and each character in the queue acts sequentially if they are queued to act, and once they have finished, their wait timer resets and starts counting down, even during other characters' actions. The result is deceptively fast-paced combat that preserves turn order and is a lot more fluid than a turn-based system. There's a lot of testing still to do, but even at the prototype phase, it seems to be coming together well. Another point of difference is that characters use 3D weapons, even though the characters themselves are 2D. Generally speaking, this allows characters to wield different weapon types without having to redraw their sprite sheets for each unique weapon, or having to make a custom shader to handle multiple 2D animation layers. Though at some point down the track, I'll be experimenting with using both of them at once, because I like pain. I'm trying to avoid the common trap of I'm gonna add this and I'm gonna add that, and only really showcase features I can actually build. With that said, the plan for TQ's story is to follow the journey of 3 playable characters through the world of Thesia as they track down a big bad. Pretty standard fare for RPGs, but weaving 3 individual stories into one coherent multiplayer thing is going to be so much fun. And by fun I mean probably impossible, which is why it's in the I'm gonna bucket. I developed my own multiplayer framework for TQ because I like pain, but also when I first started working on this project, Unity had no official networking solution. No netcode for game objects. I would have had to modify MLAPI or Photon quite heavily to get the functionality I needed, so I decided to cook one up myself. I'm in the process of converting my system over to netcode now that it's more stable, but there are always pros and cons in any system. I found that I was spending more time as a network engineer fixing low-level networking bugs than I was developing my project with my homebrew system, even if it did give me more control over things like scene management and object replication across the network. I'll eventually make a tutorial for my own network system, if not to show you why you shouldn't roll your own, but it might be useful to see how a networking framework actually works. If you've made it this far, then thanks for watching, and subscribe and tell your mum.